They say a broken heart can kill you faster than any disease, but I never believed it until the night my own son called and told me he'd sold everything I owned. I was lying alone in a sterile hospital room, still reeling from heart surgery, when Ethan's voice, cold, unrecognizable, cut through the darkness. "Mom, I sold the house and your car. The money's already gone. I'm moving out tomorrow." The betrayal was so complete, it made me wish the anesthesia had never worn off. If you've ever felt abandoned by someone you loved more than your own life, please hit that subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Tell me I'm not alone. The antiseptic tang burned in my nostrils as I blinked through the neon glare. It was 2:14 a.m., the kind of hour when the rest of the world is silent except for the relentless beeping of hospital machines and the distant rumble of a janitor's cart. My chest throbbed, not from the incision, but from the words echoing in my mind. My house on Willow Lane, the one with the lilac bushes Ethan used to climb as a boy, gone. The navy blue Subaru I'd saved for over a decade, the one we drove cross-country after his father died, sold to the highest bidder. I tried to steady my breathing as the phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the tray. Every instinct told me to scream, to demand an explanation, but the painkillers made my thoughts swim. I pressed the nurse call button, but when she appeared, all I could manage was a whisper. "Could you close the blinds, please?" I didn't want anyone to see the tears streaming down my face. Ethan used to be my whole world. After my husband Ben passed away, I poured everything into our only son. I worked double shifts at the bakery to keep him in private school. I skipped meals to pay for his soccer cleats, his band trips, his dreams. I was mother and father and best friend, or at least I thought I was. Now, all that love felt like a rope I'd been tightening around my own neck. I lay awake for hours, replaying every birthday, every Christmas, every late-night pep talk. Was there a moment I missed, a sign that Ethan was slipping away? Or was this betrayal always waiting for me, lurking in the shadows while I busied myself with love and sacrifice? The nurse returned just before sunrise with a paper cup of pills. "You need to rest, Mrs. Harper," she said gently. "You've had a shock." I nodded, but there would be no sleep. Not after that call. When visiting hours began, I watched the door, half expecting Ethan to walk in and say it was all a misunderstanding, a bad dream. But the hours ticked by and the only visitor was a silent guilt that perched at the end of my bed, refusing to leave. By noon, I knew I had to do something. I reached for my old phone, fingers shaking, and scrolled through our last texts. They were all short, practical, the warmth gone long before last night. My eyes lingered on a photo from a year ago, Ethan and me at Sweet Magnolia Cafe, laughing over lemon meringue pie, his arm draped around my shoulders. How did we get from there to here? As I stared at that picture, a cold clarity settled in. Ethan thought he'd taken everything from me. But he'd forgotten one thing: his mother didn't raise a fool. For years I'd protected him, but now it was time to protect myself. What Ethan didn't know was that the house he just sold was never really his to sell. I'd seen too much in my 58 years, survived too many storms to hand over my life's work without a plan. If he wanted a fight, he'd just started a war he couldn't win. I watched the sunlight creep across the ceiling tiles, chasing shadows from the corners of my room, but nothing could banish the chill in my bones. There's a loneliness to betrayal that seeps into your skin, settles behind your eyes, and makes every memory ache. I kept thinking about that old house on Willow Lane, the way Ben and I painted the porch swing robin's egg blue the summer before he got sick, how Ethan would run barefoot through the garden chasing fireflies, his laughter ringing out like the promise of everything good in this world. Now those memories felt like relics from a life I barely recognized. I pressed the photo of Ethan and me at Sweet Magnolia Cafe to my chest, willing myself to remember the sound of his voice before it grew cold and distant. I wondered, not for the first time, if there was a moment I could point to, a fork in the road when my son stopped being my boy and became a stranger willing to turn his back on everything we'd built together. The hospital felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. I counted the hours by the nurse's footsteps and the beeps from the heart monitor. My mind kept circling back to the last time Ethan visited me, just a week before the surgery. He'd breezed in, handsome as ever in his pressed khakis and a crisp blue button-down, his hair neatly parted like when he was a teenager. He brought me a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, but never met my eyes for more than a moment. We made small talk about his new job at the tech firm, his plans for the future. He never asked how I was coping alone in the old house, never mentioned the overdue bills or the leak in the kitchen ceiling. I tried to bridge the gap, to find the boy I'd raised, but he only smiled politely and said he was busy. That was the last time I saw him in person. Now I wondered if he'd already made up his mind. When the doctor finally came in to check my incision, I forced myself to sit up, to act stronger than I felt. "You're healing well, Mrs. Harper," he said, making notes on his tablet. "If you can manage at home, we'll discharge you in the morning." Home. The word stung. Did I even have one left? I nodded, thanked him, and asked the nurse for my personal items. My purse, my wallet, and the battered file folder I always kept at the bottom of my bag. Inside were documents I'd assembled over years, birth certificates, my marriage license, and, most importantly, the trust paperwork Ben and I created after his diagnosis. I took a shaky breath and flipped through the trust agreement. The house and the car were held in the Harper family trust, not in Ethan's name, not even in mine alone. Ben was always the practical one, the planner. "It only takes one bad day for everything to go wrong," he used to say. I'd thought he was being pessimistic, but now, I saw he was just being wise. I traced the legal language with my finger, remembering the night we signed the papers at our lawyer's office. Ethan was still in high school, slumped in the waiting room with his headphones on, completely uninterested in grown-up worries. I never imagined those signatures would one day be the only thing standing between me and ruin. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Margaret, my closest friend. We'd taught at the same elementary school for 15 years, shared secrets over endless cups of chamomile tea. She answered on the first ring. "Ellen? Is everything okay?" The sound of genuine concern nearly undid me. I swallowed my pride and told her the truth, about Ethan's call, the missing house, the car. She gasped, then her voice turned fierce. "That boy needs a wake-up call. You come stay with me, honey. We'll figure this out together." Tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you, Margaret. I just need to get out of this hospital." After I hung up, I resolved to take action. I called the lawyer's office, left a message for Mr. Castillo, the same man who'd helped Ben and me all those years ago. Then I started making a list, practical, step by step, of everything I needed to do when I got out. I wasn't going to let Ethan's betrayal destroy me. The next morning, a nurse wheeled me out to the curb, the spring air sharp in my lungs. Margaret was waiting, her arms wide, her silver hair shining in the sun. I fell into her embrace, letting the warmth of her friendship remind me that not everyone would turn away when things got hard. Margaret drove us through Maplewood, the small town that had been my whole world for nearly 30 years. I tried not to look as we passed Willow Lane, but I couldn't help myself. My house stood at the end of the block, sunlight glinting off the freshly painted shutters. For a moment, I imagined Ben out front, waving at me from the porch, but when I blinked, all I saw was the for sale sign staked in the yard, bold red letters announcing my loss to the entire neighborhood. I pressed my lips together and looked away, forcing myself to remember Ben's words. "We built that life together, Ellen. No one can take that from you, not really." As we pulled up to Margaret's cozy cottage, I squared my shoulders, ready to fight for what was left of my dignity, my future, my family. I was a mother, and I wasn't done yet. Margaret's guest room was small but welcoming, with floral curtains that let in the morning sun and a hand-knit quilt folded at the end of the bed. As soon as she'd unpacked my few things, a robe, a toothbrush, my file folder, I sat by the window, watching birds pick at the feeder outside. It felt strange, being a guest in my best friend's house instead of the queen of my own castle. I kept reaching for things that weren't there, the familiar creak of my kitchen floor, the faded family photos on the mantel, the worn armchair where Ben used to fall asleep reading. Margaret bustled in with a tray of tea and a plate of lemon scones, her eyes full of worry she tried to hide behind a forced cheerfulness. "Eat something, Ellen. You need your strength," she said, her voice soft but insistent. I managed a smile and broke off a piece of scone, grateful for her kindness, even if my appetite was gone. All morning, I made calls, first to the bank, then to the insurance company. Each conversation chipped away at the numbness that had settled over me since Ethan's call. At the bank, the manager confirmed that my checking account had been emptied 2 days earlier. The withdrawal was made in person, with proper identification, she said, her tone apologetic but firm. I closed my eyes, picturing Ethan standing at the counter, signing my name without a hint of remorse. When I hung up, Margaret found me staring at the wall, clutching my file folder like a life raft. "We'll get through this," she promised, patting my hand. "You're not alone." I squeezed her fingers, letting her strength shore up my own. Mr. Castillo, our lawyer, called back before lunch. His voice was steady, comforting, but I could hear the concern in every word. "Ellen, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. I've reviewed the trust documents. Legally, the house and the car are still assets of the Harper Family Trust. Ethan had no authority to sell them, at least, not without your consent." A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a fresh surge of anger. "So what now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We'll need to notify the escrow company, the realtor, and the title office. If the sale hasn't closed, we can stop it. If it has, we may have grounds to reverse the transaction, but it'll be a fight." The fight was exactly what I needed. After the call, I finally allowed myself to cry, not out of weakness, but because tears were the first step toward healing. Margaret held me while I sobbed, her arms tight around my shoulders, rocking me the way I used to rock Ethan when he was small and scared of thunderstorms. By late afternoon, I pulled myself together and decided it was time to talk to my son. I dialed his number, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped the phone. He picked up on the second ring, his voice flat, guarded. "Mom." I tried to keep my tone even. "Ethan, I know what you did. I've spoken to the bank, to Mr. Castillo. The trust." He cut me off, sharp and impatient. "I had to, Mom. You never let me breathe. You always said the house was for both of us, for my future. Well, now it is. I need the money more than you do. I'm starting my own life." I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "That house was never just bricks and wood, Ethan. It was your father's legacy. You didn't just take money, you took memories, security, everything I had left of him. Of us." For a moment, I thought I heard a tremor in his voice. "You don't understand, Mom. I'm tired of being treated like a kid. I need to be independent." A hollow laugh escaped me. "Independent? Is that what you call stealing from your own mother?" Silence crackled between us, heavy and unforgiving. Finally, Ethan spoke. "This conversation is over, Mom. I'm done feeling guilty. You should be, too." He hung up before I could reply. I stared at the phone, my heart thudding with a mix of grief and fury. I realized then that the son I'd raised, the gentle boy who used to bring me wildflowers and draw me crayon cards, was gone, replaced by a man I barely recognized. Margaret came in with another cup of tea, her presence grounding me. "Did he say anything?" I shook my head, unable to speak. She sat beside me, rubbing small circles on my back, a steady reminder that even in the darkest moments, I was still loved. That night, I barely slept. I watched the moonlight shift across the ceiling, replaying Ethan's words, trying to find the thread that had unraveled our bond. By morning, exhaustion pressed down on me like a weight, but beneath it, a new resolve was forming. I would not let Ethan's betrayal define me. I would not become a victim of my own story. After breakfast, I called Mr. Castillo again. "Let's fight this," I said, my voice clear and strong. "For Ben, for me, for the life we built together." He promised to handle the legal side, but I knew there was more I needed to do. I decided to visit the real estate office myself, to look into the eyes of the people who'd helped my son take my home. Margaret insisted on coming with me. As we walked through downtown Maplewood, I straightened my shoulders, determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The office was bright and modern, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the hum of quiet voices. When I introduced myself, the receptionist's smile faltered. "Oh, Mrs. Harper. I'm so sorry about all of this. We just followed the paperwork your son provided. He said you'd signed everything." I shook my head. He lied. Those signatures weren't mine. The trust. She nodded, flustered, and ushered us into a small conference room. "Let me get the broker." As I waited, I looked at Margaret, her eyes full of faith in me. For the first time since Ben died, I realized I could be strong, even when I was terrified, even when the people I loved most let me down. Because strength isn't about never breaking. It's about finding the courage to put yourself back together, piece by piece, and keep going. The broker's name was Janet Ellis, a woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, a nervous smile, and an air of efficiency that told me she was used to solving problems, not causing them. Still, her eyes flickered with unease as she shuffled the stack of files in front of her and glanced from me to Margaret and back again. "Mrs. Harper, I want to start by saying how sorry I am for all of this. We always try to be vigilant, but your son was very convincing." Janet pushed a document across the table, my signature scrawled in blue ink at the bottom. But I could see it for what it was, a clumsy forgery, the E in Ellen stretched awkwardly, the H missing its usual flourish. "That's not my signature," I said, my voice low and steady. "I never authorized the sale of my house. And the property is held in the Harper Family Trust. My lawyer will be in touch." Janet nodded quickly, her pen tapping against the folder in an anxious rhythm. "I understand. The sale isn't fully closed yet. There's a 10-day escrow window and, given the legal challenge, I can put a hold on the process until your attorney submits the paperwork. But, Mrs. Harper, if your son goes to court and claims you're mentally unfit, well, things could get complicated. I've seen it happen." The air went out of the room for a moment, as if someone had opened a door to a winter storm. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't let them scare you, Ellen. We'll fight this." I looked Janet in the eye, my resolve crystallizing. I am not incompetent. My mind is clear. And I have every document I need to prove it. After we left the office, Margaret and I walked in silence, both lost in our thoughts. Maplewood's Main Street was alive with the ordinary bustle of late morning, shopkeepers setting out flower pots, an old man feeding pigeons in the park, kids racing scooters down the sidewalk. The world had kept spinning even as mine fell apart. We stopped at the bakery where I'd worked for nearly 20 years. The owner, Sam, spotted me through the window and hurried out, his flour-dusted apron flapping. "Ellen. Where've you been? Folks have been asking after you." I forced a smile. "Just taking some time off, Sam. Some family issues." He frowned, looking from my face to Margaret's, then pulled me into a hug that smelled of cinnamon and yeast. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." His kindness nearly undid me. I blinked back tears and thanked him, grateful for the small anchor of normalcy in a sea of uncertainty. Back at Margaret's house, I called Mr. Castillo again. He answered on the first ring. Ellen, I just got off the phone with Janet Ellis. She'll put a legal hold on the sale until we get a court order. I'll file for an injunction this afternoon, and will request a temporary restraining order to keep Ethan from accessing any more funds. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt hope stirring. Thank you, Arthur. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're not alone, Ellen. And remember, it's not just about the property. If Ethan forged your signature, that's a felony. The law is on your side, even if it takes some time. That night, I sat at Margaret's kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, cups of cooling tea, and the steady thrum of cicadas outside the open window. Margaret had gone to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Ethan's face, how distant he'd become, how quickly he'd been willing to turn on me for money. I wrote him a letter. The words came slowly at first, then in a flood, memories, questions, raw heartbreak. I told him about the first time I held him in my arms, how small and fragile he'd been, how I'd promised to protect him from everything. I wrote about Ben, about all the nights I sat awake worrying after his diagnosis, wondering how I'd ever manage alone. But I also wrote about the boundaries we set, the choices we make, the consequences that come when we forget the people who built us. When I finished, I didn't know if I'd ever send it. Maybe the letter was more for me than for Ethan, a way to remind myself that my love was real, my pain justified. The next morning, the injunction was filed and the restraining order granted. Mr. Castillo called with the news just after breakfast. It'll take some time for the paperwork to move through the courts, but for now, the sale is frozen. Ethan won't be able to access any proceeds. Relief swept through me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. Ethan would fight back. I knew my son well enough to know that pride, especially wounded pride, was a dangerous thing. Sure enough, later that afternoon, my phone rang. Ethan's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to hear his voice. But I listened to the message after a few deep breaths. Mom, you've really made a mess of things. Why are you dragging lawyers into this? Why are you trying to ruin my life? If you just sign the papers and let it go, we can both move on. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. His words stung, but I heard something else beneath the anger, a trace of fear, maybe even regret. I pressed delete, set the phone down, and walked outside into the fading light, letting the quiet hush of dusk wrap around me. I stood in Margaret's backyard, breathing in the scent of cut grass and lilacs. I looked up at the stars appearing one by one in the velvet sky and remembered something Ben used to say, "You can't always save the people you love, Ellen. Sometimes you just have to save yourself." So that's what I would do. Sleep came in brief, restless waves that night, each dream haunted by Ethan's angry voice and Ben's steady presence, both slipping through my fingers before I could hold on. I woke before dawn to the soft patter of rain on the window, the kind of gentle shower that makes you want to stay under the covers and forget the world outside. But there was no hiding from my reality, not anymore. Downstairs, Margaret was already up, shuffling around the kitchen in her pink slippers, humming quietly to herself as she brewed a pot of strong coffee. She looked up when I entered, her smile both tired and reassuring. "Morning, Ellen. I didn't sleep much either. Sit. I'll get you some eggs and toast." I tried to eat, but each bite felt like sawdust. My mind spun with worries. Would Ethan retaliate? What if the court sided with him? Would I ever feel at home anywhere again? Margaret watched me pick at my food and reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know. Whatever happens, I've got you." That simple promise was a lifeline. I squeezed her hand, trying to let some of her steadiness seep into my bones. After breakfast, I showered and dressed, then called Mr. Castillo to check on the status of the injunction. "Things are in motion," he said. "But Ellen, be prepared, Ethan's hired his own lawyer. He's contesting the trust, saying you're not of sound mind to manage your affairs. I felt the blood drain from my face. He's what? It's not uncommon in cases like this, Mr. Castillo reassured me. But we have medical records, witness statements, and a long history of you managing your finances. Don't let it rattle you. This is what your son's attorney will use to try to force a settlement or scare you into giving up. We won't let that happen. After I hung up, I took a walk around the block to clear my head. The rain had stopped, and the sky was a pale gray, heavy with unshed tears. I noticed how every front porch in Maplewood had its own story: American flags, wind chimes, faded wreaths left over from the holidays. Ordinary lives, untouched by the kind of betrayal that had shattered mine. Back at Margaret's, I decided it was time to confront another piece of my past. I dug out the box of Ben's old papers she'd kept for me in her attic: bank statements, letters, the journal he'd started when he first got sick. As I sorted through the yellowed pages, I found his handwriting on a slip of notebook paper: "For Ellen, when you need reminding, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone, not even our son, make you doubt it." I pressed the note to my heart, tears finally coming, but this time they weren't just for what I'd lost. They were for what I still had: a legacy of love and resilience, a reason to keep fighting. That afternoon, Margaret drove me to my doctor's office so I could get an updated statement of my mental and physical health. Dr. Jensen, who'd known me for over a decade, listened quietly as I explained the situation. She shook her head in disbelief. "Ellen, I'll write the letter myself. You're as sharp as ever. No court is going to believe otherwise." Paperwork in hand, I felt a new sense of control. I faxed copies to Mr. Castillo and tucked the original in my file folder, the one that was quickly becoming my shield against every accusation Ethan's lawyer could throw at me. Later, Margaret and I sat on her front porch, watching a patch of sun break through the clouds and spill across her garden. She reached into her knitting basket and handed me a ball of soft blue yarn. "Here," she said. "You always said knitting calmed your nerves." I took the yarn, let it unravel across my lap, and began to knit, a simple scarf, each stitch a reminder that I could still create something warm and good, even in the middle of chaos. As the rows grew, I felt my breathing steady, the tightness in my chest easing, just a little. Evening settled in, and we made a small dinner together. Afterward, I called my sister, Lila, who lived 2 states away. I hadn't told her everything yet, didn't want to worry her until I knew how bad things would get. But the moment I heard her voice, the words spilled out in a rush: Ethan's betrayal, the forged signature, the court battle looming. She listened without interruption, then said, "Ellen, you are not alone. I'll come if you need me. And as for Ethan, he's going to realize too late what he's lost." I hung up feeling both comforted and strangely sad. Family ties are a tangle: love, obligation, disappointment, and hope all twisted together. I wasn't sure if I would ever find my way through the knots, but at least I knew I had people in my corner. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the house settle and the distant sound of a train whistle, I made myself a promise. I would see this through to the end, not just for the sake of my house or my car, but for the woman I used to be, the one Ben believed in, the one my friends and sister still saw every time they looked at me. I closed my eyes, breathed in the faint scent of lilacs drifting through the window, and whispered into the darkness, "I am stronger than I think. I am not done yet." A week passed, measured in court papers, restless nights, and the endless waiting that comes when your whole life hangs in the balance. Each morning, I woke in Margaret's spare room and checked my phone for updates from Mr. Castillo, hoping for progress, dreading more bad news. Most days, the only messages were from Margaret's friends at the church, offering casseroles or prayers. I was grateful for both. One gray Tuesday, Mr. Castillo called with an edge of excitement in his voice. "Ellen, the court date is set for next Friday. The judge has granted us an evidentiary hearing. That means Ethan's attorney will have to produce real proof for his claims, no more vague accusations. And with Dr. Jensen's statement, your financial records, and the trust documents, we have a solid case. I let out a shaky breath I didn't know I'd been holding. What happens if Ethan shows up with more forged papers? Or claims I coerced him, or that I'm manipulating the situation? Mr. Castillo sounded calm and reassuring. If he tries to introduce false documents, he risks criminal charges. I doubt his lawyer will let him go that far. But Ellen, you have to be prepared. He might say things in court that hurt. Things meant to embarrass you or make you question yourself. Promise me you won't let him get to you. I promised. But the fear lingered. I couldn't shake the memory of Ethan's angry message, the way his voice had sounded so final, so full of blame. What would I say to him, face to face, after all that had happened? Would I recognize the boy I raised, or only see the man who'd tried to erase me from my own life? To distract myself, I tried to help Margaret around the house. We spent an afternoon in her garden, pulling weeds and planting marigolds along the walk. The physical labor grounded me, hands deep in the earth, sweat trickling down my back. You know, Margaret said as she pressed a seedling into the soil, sometimes things have to be pulled out by the roots before new growth can happen. It's painful, but it's the only way forward. I nodded, thinking about all the roots tangled beneath the surface of my life. Old wounds, unfinished grief, unspoken regrets. Maybe this fight wasn't just about the house or the car. Maybe it was about finally letting go of the illusion that love alone could save someone from their own choices. Later that week, Lila arrived from out of town, her arms full of groceries and her face set in a look that dared anyone to cross her. She hugged me so hard my ribs ached, then surveyed Margaret's kitchen like a general inspecting the troops. I'm here to help, Ellen. And don't argue, I've taken vacation days and left Tom with the kids. Family first. Her presence brought new energy to the house. She cooked, cleaned, and filled the rooms with laughter, her quick wit slicing through the tension. At night, we sat up talking, sharing stories of our childhood, our marriages, our children. Lila told me about her own struggles with her eldest, how she sometimes worried that one wrong word could send him spiraling away from her for good. Do you think Ethan hates me? I asked her, my voice small in the darkness. No, she said without hesitation. He's lost. Angry. But he doesn't hate you. He just doesn't know how to forgive himself for what he's done, so he's trying to make it your fault instead. I let her words sink in, not sure if I believed them, but grateful for the comfort anyway. As Friday drew near, my nerves tightened. The night before court, I lay awake replaying every moment of Ethan's life, his first steps, his awkward teenage years, the night he got his acceptance letter to college and danced around the kitchen with Ben, laughing like nothing bad could ever touch us. I realized, with a jolt, that I still loved him. I would always love him, no matter what happened in that courtroom. But loving him didn't mean letting him destroy me. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. I dressed carefully, navy slacks, a soft white blouse, the silver locket Ben had given me for our 20th anniversary. I stared at my reflection, searching for the woman I used to be. She looked older, maybe, and a little worn, but her eyes were steady. Ready. Margaret and Lila flanked me as we walked into the courthouse, their presence a silent shield against the whispers and stares. Mr. Castillo greeted us in the lobby, his briefcase in hand, his suit pressed and professional. You're not alone, he reminded me. Whatever happens, you have people who care. In the courtroom, Ethan sat at the opposite table, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, his jaw clenched tight. For a moment, he looked up and our eyes met. I saw a flash of something, regret, maybe, or fear, but then his lawyer leaned over to whisper in his ear, and the mask slipped back into place. The judge, a woman with gray hair and a sharp gaze, called us to order. The hearing began. As Mr. Castillo presented our evidence, Dr. Jensen's statement, the trust documents, records of my financial management, I tried to focus on each word, not letting my mind wander to the ache in my heart. Ethan's lawyer countered with vague accusations and questioned my fragile health, but when pressed for proof, he had nothing but conjecture and hearsay. Then Ethan took the stand. His voice was flat, his answers clipped. He talked about feeling trapped, about wanting his fair share, about how I never let him grow up. But when Mr. Castillo asked him directly if he'd forged my signature, Ethan looked down and couldn't answer. I saw the moment the truth caught up with him. I saw the little boy behind the man, lost and frightened, realizing the damage he'd done. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and faced the judge. My hands trembled, but my voice was clear. Your Honor, I never stopped loving my son. But I will not be erased. This house, this car, this life, they are my legacy. I am of sound mind, and I am here to fight for what's right. As the hearing ended, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I didn't know what the judge would decide, but I knew I had done everything I could. For Ben. For myself. Even, in a way, for Ethan. The hardest battles are the ones we fight with the people we love. The courthouse steps felt steeper on the way down, my legs heavy with exhaustion and the weight of everything left unsaid. Margaret and Lila hovered nearby, careful not to crowd me but close enough that I felt their presence, a silent reassurance that I was not alone. The sky was blindingly blue, the kind of cold, sharp afternoon that makes your lungs ache. We walked to Margaret's car in silence, but when the doors closed and the world faded away, I let out a long, shuddering sigh. It's over, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe the battle had ended there in that sterile courtroom, but I knew better. No matter what the judge decided, the fight with Ethan, inside my heart, inside my family, would not be over with a single ruling. Back at Margaret's, the three of us sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around mugs of tea that cooled as we talked in circles, replaying every moment of the hearing. Lila was fierce, determined. You did everything right, Ellen. The judge saw the truth. Ethan couldn't even look you in the eye. Margaret squeezed my arm, her gentle strength grounding me. No matter what happens, you showed your son, and yourself, that you won't be bullied or erased. That matters. I nodded, but inside, I was replaying the look on Ethan's face when the judge asked him about the signature. For a split second, his mask had slipped, and I'd seen my boy again, the boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares, who would tug on my sleeve at school pickup and whisper, I love you, Mama. Don't ever leave. Where had that child gone? And was he lost forever? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the shadows on the ceiling, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A text from Ethan, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want it to go this far. I just needed a way out. I hope you can forgive me someday. I stared at the message, my heart racing, a dozen emotions warring for space. Relief. Sadness. Anger. Compassion. I typed a dozen replies and deleted each one. What could I possibly say? That I forgave him? That I still loved him? That I was proud he'd finally told the truth, even if it was too late? Instead, I turned off my phone and lay awake until dawn, wrestling with the impossibility of loving someone who hurt you so deeply and not knowing how, or if, you'd ever be able to let them all the way back in. The next day, the judge's decision arrived in a crisp white envelope delivered to Margaret's front door. My hands shook as I opened it, Lila and Margaret standing at my side. The ruling was clear, the sale of the house was invalid, the forged signature a felony offense, the assets of the Harper family trust protected by law. Ethan was barred from accessing any funds or property without my written consent. I read the letter twice, barely daring to believe it. The sense of relief was overwhelming, like coming up for air after being underwater for months. Margaret hugged me, her voice thick with emotion. You did it, Ellen. You really did it. But as I sat down at the kitchen table, the victory felt bittersweet. I had my house, my car, my financial security. But my relationship with Ethan was in ruins, scattered in pieces that I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. The next week passed in a strange, dreamlike blur. The story spread through Maplewood faster than I could control. Neighbors called and dropped by, some with casseroles, others with curious glances or clumsy attempts at comfort. I always knew Ethan was troubled, one woman confided, her tone equal parts sympathy and gossip. I bit my tongue, unwilling to expose my son's pain to the world, even as I carried the weight of his choices on my shoulders. With the legal battle behind me, practical concerns took over. I met with Sam at the bakery about returning to work part-time, both to rebuild my savings and to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Margaret and I cleaned out her guest room, sorting my clothes and folding the quilt she'd made me when Ben died. I spent afternoons walking through my neighborhood, watching kids ride bikes on Willow Lane and letting the familiar sights and sounds knit me back into the fabric of my old life. One sunny afternoon, as I weeded the flower beds outside my house for the first time in months, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk. I looked up to see Ethan standing at the edge of the yard, hands shoved deep in his pockets, head bowed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air was full of things we both wanted to say but didn't know how. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. I stood, wiping my hands on my jeans, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear his words. "Why?" I managed. He swallowed. "To apologize. To explain. Or just to see you. I know I don't deserve it." 100 responses sprang to mind, sharp and justified, but I found myself nodding, stepping aside to let him pass. We walked up the porch steps in silence, the distance between us both smaller and bigger than ever. Inside, we sat across from each other in the living room, surrounded by all the things he'd nearly lost, photos, knickknacks, memories. Ethan stared at his hands. "I was scared, Mom. I thought if I could just get out from under everything, start over, maybe I could fix my life. But all I did was break yours." I listened, my anger softening with every word, replaced by a bone-deep sadness. "You didn't just break mine, Ethan. You broke your own. But that doesn't mean we can't start again." His eyes met mine, hopeful and haunted. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" I closed my eyes, thinking of Ben, of Margaret and Lila, of every sleepless night and every prayer I'd whispered into the darkness. "I don't know, Ethan. But I want to try. The first step is always the hardest, but sometimes it's enough just to take it." We sat together in the quiet living room, the afternoon sun slanting through the lace curtains and turning the dust motes to gold. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was different now, not heavy with anger, but tentative, like the hush before a storm finally breaks and lets in the light. Ethan cleared his throat and started to speak, but the words came out in a rush, tripping over themselves. "I don't know how to say sorry for all of it, Mom. I've thought about it 1,000 times. But every time I try, it sounds so small compared to what I did." I studied his face, the deep circles under his eyes, the way he twisted his hands together, his shoulders hunched like he was bracing for another blow. He looked older than his 28 years, but also like the lost teenager I'd seen too many nights, standing outside his father's hospital room, scared and pretending he wasn't. "There are some things sorry can't fix," I said quietly. "But I'm willing to hear you out. I think you owe that to both of us." He nodded, swallowing hard. "After Dad died, I felt like I was always letting you down. No matter what I did, I couldn't fill that space. I know you tried so hard to give me everything, maybe too much, sometimes. But when I got into trouble with money, I was embarrassed. I couldn't tell you. It felt easier to run, to blame you, than to admit I'd made a mess of my own life. I listened, letting his words sink in. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to point out all the sacrifices I'd made. But deep down, I knew some of it was true. I'd tried to be both parents, to shield him from pain, to make up for Ben's absence by giving Ethan everything he wanted, maybe even when he hadn't earned it. I'd thought love could fix everything. I'd been wrong. We both made mistakes, I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. But stealing from me, selling my house and my car, forging my name, Ethan, that was a line you never should have crossed. You broke my trust. You broke my heart. He nodded, his face crumpling. I know, Mom. I know. And I can't take any of it back. All I can do is try to be better. I'm going to sign whatever paperwork Mr. Castillo gives me. I'll stay away from the trust, from your finances, from everything. I got a job, a real one, at the hardware store. I know it's not much, but it's honest. I felt a wave of pride and pain, both at once. My son, finally trying to stand on his own. I reached across the coffee table, my hand trembling, and covered his. You're right. Sorry isn't enough. But actions matter. If you want my forgiveness, you'll have to earn it, one honest day at a time. Tears slid down his cheeks, and he didn't try to hide them. For the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy Ben had loved, the boy I'd sworn to protect, even from himself. We talked for a long time, about little things at first, work, Maplewood, Margaret's casseroles, then, gradually, about the bigger wounds, how we missed Ben, how we drifted apart, how it might be possible, one day, to find our way back to something like family. By the time Ethan left, the sun was low in the sky, the world washed in that golden hour light that makes everything look softer. At the door, he turned back, looking suddenly shy. Do you think I could come by again sometime? Just to talk? Or help with the garden? I managed a real smile. I'd like that. But it'll take time, Ethan. You have to give me that much. He nodded, understanding. I will. I promise. After he was gone, the house felt strangely peaceful. For the first time since the ordeal began, I believed that healing might actually be possible. It wouldn't be quick, and it wouldn't be easy, but it could start here, with these small steps. That evening, Margaret and Lila came over with a bottle of wine and a deck of cards, determined to celebrate the court's decision and, quietly, to check on me. I told them about Ethan's visit, not everything, just enough to let them see hope flickering at the edges of my grief. Margaret poured the wine, her eyes shining. You did it, Ellen. Not just the legal part. You stood up for yourself. You found your voice. Lila grinned and dealt the cards. And you didn't let this mess break you. That's what matters. We played gin rummy late into the night, laughter and gentle teasing filling the house, washing away some of the loneliness that had taken root. When I went to bed, I found Ben's old note tucked beneath my pillow. You're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone, not even our son, make you doubt it. I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest easing just a little. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, maybe more hard conversations, maybe setbacks, but for tonight, I let myself rest in the knowledge that I'd survived. That I'd chosen myself. That, somehow, I was healing. Sometimes, forgiveness is not a gift you give someone else. Sometimes, it's the gift you finally allow yourself. The days after Ethan's visit settled into a new kind of routine, quieter but not empty. I woke early and opened the windows to let in the spring air, letting the scent of lilacs drift through the house that I'd fought so hard to keep. There were repairs to finish, closets to reorganize, and a flower bed out front that had gone wild in my months away. The work was steadying, tangible proof that I could shape my world again, even if it was one small task at a time. Ethan kept his promise. He texted each week, sometimes just a simple update from the hardware store, sometimes a longer message about a book he'd read or a movie he'd watched that reminded him of Dad. He never asked for money. He never came by unannounced. When he did visit, it was always with his hands full, bags of mulch for the garden, a box of groceries he'd picked up on sale, even an old wooden chair he'd found at a thrift shop and refinished for my porch. Every conversation was careful, like we were both testing the water after a long winter's thaw. Some days, it felt natural, almost like old times, sharing a meal or laughing over one of Margaret's stories. Other days, the tension between us returned, sharp and silent, as if the pain of what had happened still hovered, waiting for a moment of weakness to slip back in. But the house was coming back to life. Lila returned home but called every evening, checking in, making sure I was eating well and sleeping through the night. Margaret's church friends continued their parade of casseroles and soup, each dish a reminder that even when things fall apart, community endures. Sam at the bakery offered me more hours, and I found comfort in the simple rituals of kneading dough and greeting regulars with a smile. One rainy afternoon, as I stood by the window watching water bead along the glass, I felt the old ache of loneliness returning, sharper now that the crisis had passed. It was as if, in the quiet that followed, all the grief I'd set aside to survive came rushing back. Ben's absence, the echo of Ethan's betrayal, the years I'd lost trying to hold everything together. I pulled out Ben's journal and sat at the kitchen table, tracing the lines of his handwriting, letting the memories come. I thought about the promises I'd made to him as he lay in that hospital bed, how I'd take care of Ethan, how I'd keep the house, how I'd never let our family break apart. It hurt to admit that some promises are beyond anyone's power to keep. And yet, somehow, I'd survived. I'd found a way through, even if it wasn't the path I'd imagined. I'd learned, painfully, that strength isn't always loud or certain. Sometimes, it's just getting up each morning and choosing not to give up on yourself. Ethan called one Saturday morning, his voice softer than usual. I'm coming by with some bulbs for the front garden. Maybe we could plant them together? I hesitated, the memory of our last big fight still too close. But I heard something in his voice, hope, maybe, or the beginning of real change. All right, Ethan. That would be nice. He arrived in work boots and an old raincoat, a bag of daffodil bulbs tucked under his arm. We worked side by side in the drizzle, our conversation drifting from safe topics, sports, the weather, how the neighbor's dog kept digging up the roses, to the harder questions. At one point, Ethan paused, his hands muddy, his gaze fixed on the ground. Mom, do you ever think things will really go back to the way they were? I wiped sweat from my brow, searching for the truth. No, Ethan. I don't think they ever will. Some things change us too much. But that doesn't mean we can't find something new, something good. We just have to keep trying. He nodded, not looking up. I want to earn back your trust. I know it'll take time. It will, I said. But you're here, and you're trying. That's a start. We planted the last of the bulbs in silence, the rain washing away the worst of the dirt and, maybe, some of the bitterness still lingering between us. As spring deepened, the first shoots appeared, green and stubborn against the dark soil. Every morning, I checked their progress, amazed at their resilience. Life, I realized, always finds a way forward, even through the hardest winters. That night, as I made tea in the quiet kitchen, I thought about forgiveness, not as a single act, but as a series of choices, made every day. The choice to open the door, to share a meal, to risk being heard again in the hope of something better. Ben's words echoed in my heart, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone, not even our son, make you doubt it. I smiled at the memory, the ache in my chest now softer, almost sweet. I'd learned that loving someone doesn't mean letting them break you. It means holding on to yourself, even as you reach out to meet them where they are. The rain eased, and in the hush that followed, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. Tomorrow would come, and with it, new chances, maybe not for the life I once had, but for the life I could still build. The days stretched toward summer, each one brighter and warmer than the last. The daffodils Ethan and I planted bloomed at the edge of the yard, their yellow heads nodding in the breeze like tiny bursts of hope. I caught myself smiling more often, at neighbors passing by, at the regulars who came into the bakery for morning rolls, even at my own reflection in the hall mirror. The woman looking back at me was older, maybe, a little more lined around the eyes, but there was something new in her posture, a confidence that came from surviving what she'd once thought would break her. I returned to work at the bakery 3 mornings a week, kneading dough and sprinkling cinnamon, my hands steady as I lost myself in the rhythm of routine. There was comfort in the familiar, and even more in the unexpected moments, a customer's laughter, a child's sticky fingers reaching for a cookie, the feeling of being needed again. Margaret's kitchen remained my sanctuary. She and I spent long evenings sharing meals, trading stories, and sometimes sitting together in silence, content just to know we weren't alone. Lila still called every evening, her voice a lifeline across the miles. Each call ended with the same gentle promise, "You're stronger than you think, Ellen. Don't forget it." One Thursday afternoon, as I was dusting powdered sugar onto a tray of pastries, Sam ducked into the back room. "There's someone here asking for you," he said with a knowing smile. "He's got a bouquet of sunflowers and looks like he's been standing in the rain." I wiped my hands on my apron, heart fluttering, and walked out front. There was Ethan, holding a bunch of sunflowers so big he could barely see over the top. He looked sheepish, rainwater dripping from his hair. "Hi, Mom," he said. "I know these are your favorite." I took the flowers and set them gently on the counter, the familiar scent stirring 1,000 memories. "They are," I said, and the corners of my mouth lifted. "Thank you." He shifted from foot to foot, nervous as a boy asking for forgiveness. "I wanted to ask if you'd like to come with me to the hardware store's community day this weekend. They're giving out free tomato plants, and I thought maybe we could start a vegetable patch together. Or, if you're not ready, that's okay, too." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. I saw the hope in his eyes, the tentative offer of a future rebuilt, not the same as before, but maybe something better. "I'd like that," I said. "Let's give it a try." Saturday dawned bright and breezy. Ethan picked me up in his old pickup truck, the cab cluttered with gardening gloves and a faded photo of Ben wedged into the visor. The hardware store was bustling with families, kids carrying flats of marigolds and bags of mulch. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. Ethan introduced me to his manager, a kind woman with laugh lines and a ready handshake. "Your son's one of the hardest workers we have," she told me. "You raised a good man." I blinked back tears, not from grief but from pride I'd thought I might never feel again. We picked out tomato plants and basil, and Ethan insisted on loading the bags himself, grinning as he flexed his arms. We spent the afternoon in the yard, digging, planting, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his job, his hopes for the future, even his regrets, how ashamed he still felt, how hard he was working to be better. I listened, offering advice when asked, and silence when that was what he needed most. When we finished, the garden looked rough around the edges, but beautiful in its own messy, hopeful way. Ethan dusted dirt off his hands and looked at me, eyes shining. "Thanks, Mom, for giving me another chance." I squeezed his hand. "Thank yourself, Ethan. You're the one who chose to change." We sat on the porch steps as the sun went down, sipping iced tea and watching the world settle. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. There was still distance between us, scars that might never fully heal, but there was also room for new growth. Later that week, as I stood in the kitchen stirring soup, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, Mr. Castillo. "Ellen, I just wanted to let you know that Ethan followed through. He signed all the necessary documents, formally relinquishing any claim to the trust or your assets. Legally, everything is clear. I wanted you to hear it from me." Relief swept over me, gentler this time, not the sharp jolt of victory but the quiet assurance that came with safety. Thank you, Arthur. For everything. After we hung up, I stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the tomatoes already beginning to stretch toward the sun. I thought about how much had changed in so short a time. The hurt wasn't gone, but it didn't rule my days anymore. I'd survived betrayal, loss, and the breaking apart of everything I'd once thought was certain. What remained was stronger than before, not because I was unscathed, but because I'd learned I could heal. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting the house in warm gold. The air was full of promise, the promise of summer, of forgiveness, of family remade by honesty and time. And for the first time, I let myself believe I truly deserved it. The weeks that followed settled into a gentle rhythm, each day a small step away from the chaos and heartbreak of the past season. I tended to the garden every morning, relishing the sight of tiny green tomatoes forming on the vines, the basil's sweet fragrance carried by the breeze. Each plant felt like a symbol of new beginnings, of resilience, of the simple beauty that can follow even the worst storms. Ethan visited often, never assuming but always asking first. Sometimes he'd join me for coffee on the porch, his conversation a careful mix of small talk and hard truths. We spoke about Dad, how much we both missed him, how differently we'd grieved, and how that grief had sometimes made us strangers to each other. There were still moments of awkwardness, but they were shorter now, softened by the work we'd put in to build something honest. One afternoon, as I snipped dead blooms from the flower beds, Ethan arrived with a cardboard box. He set it down at my feet, shy but determined. I found some of Dad's old fishing gear in my closet, he said. Thought maybe we could go out to Lake Greenfield this weekend. Just us. Like we used to. The suggestion hit me with a wave of memories, sun-drenched mornings on the dock, Ben's laughter echoing across the water, a young Ethan tangled in a too-big life jacket, grinning up at his father. My chest ached, but not in the way it once had. I realized I wanted this. Not just for Ethan, but for me. I'd like that, I said, my voice steady. Let's go. Saturday dawned clear and bright. We packed a thermos of coffee, peanut butter sandwiches, and the battered tackle box. The drive out to the lake was quiet, but not tense. There was comfort in the silence, in the knowledge that not every gap needed to be filled with words. At the water's edge, we set up our rods, and for a while, the world shrank to the gentle lapping of waves and the distant calls of gulls. Ethan fumbled with a stubborn knot, swearing softly, and I couldn't help but laugh. Dad would have told you to slow down, I said, mimicking Ben's deep, patient voice. Ethan grinned, his shoulders relaxing. I know. Sometimes I still hear him in my head, you know? Especially when I'm about to do something dumb. I nodded. Me too. He'd be proud of you, Ethan. Not for being perfect. But for trying. For making things right. The words hung between us, simple and true. The sun climbed higher, the fish nibbled at our bait, and for a moment, everything felt as it should. On the drive home, Ethan glanced over, his expression serious. Mom, I know I can't undo what I did. But I want you to know, I'm here. For real. I'm not running away anymore. I reached over and squeezed his hand. I know. And I'm here, too. For both of us. That evening, after Ethan left, I sat on the porch, wrapped in Ben's old flannel, watching the sky turn to indigo. Margaret stopped by with a slice of blueberry pie, her eyes twinkling. You look happier, Ellen. Lighter. I nodded. It's not perfect, but it's real. I think that's enough. She sat beside me, comfortable in the hush. You know, I worried about you for a while. I saw how much you gave, sometimes too much. But you've learned to draw your own line. That takes courage. We ate pie together, laughter and old stories filling the air between us. Later, I called Lila, sharing the day's adventures. She whooped in delight. I told you, Ellen, family's messy, but it's worth it. And you? You're the glue. You always were. As night settled in, I walked through the house, running my hands along the worn banister, the kitchen table scarred with years of dinners and homework, the living room alive with old photos and new memories. I realized I was proud, not just of surviving, but of how I'd rebuilt, piece by piece, without losing myself. Ethan sent a final text before bed, "Thanks for today, Mom. I love you." I replied, the words easy, unforced, "I love you too, Ethan. Always." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it could last. The summer stretched ahead, filled with the promise of growth and the gentle comfort of days spent in good company. The wounds were healing, not forgotten, but no longer raw. There was work still to do, of course, and trust would have to be earned again and again, but there was time now. Time, and a hope that felt solid beneath my feet. As I stood at the window, watching fireflies dance in the dark, I thought of Ben, of all the ways we'd been broken and mended, and I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, for resilience, for forgiveness, for the stubborn, beautiful act of choosing to begin again. Summer pressed on, sweet and unhurried, with the garden in full bloom and sunlight filtering through the kitchen each morning. I found myself lingering over small joys, the smell of coffee percolating before dawn, the laughter of children playing on Willow Lane, the feel of cool grass under my bare feet. Life was simpler now, quiet, sometimes lonely, but never empty. There was space for gratitude, and I filled it every day. Ethan kept showing up, never expecting forgiveness but slowly earning it, one small gesture at a time. He helped me build a raised bed for fall vegetables, cleaned out the gutters before the first storm, and on Sundays we'd walk to the corner bakery and split a cinnamon roll just like we used to. We still had our hard days, moments when anger or regret flared, when trust felt fragile as spun glass. But each time, we chose to try again. Healing was slow, but it was real. One Sunday morning, after a summer shower, I found Ethan out back, kneeling in the dirt. He looked up, his hands muddy, his smile boyish. "The tomatoes are almost ready," he said, pride in his voice. "You think Dad would have liked the garden?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. He'd have loved it. He always said there's nothing more hopeful than a green shoot pushing through the dirt. We stood together in the sunlight, surrounded by the ordinary miracle of growing things, and for the first time since Ben died, I felt like our family was whole in its own imperfect way. Not the same as before, but something sturdy, something true. In late August, I hosted a little dinner, just Margaret, Lila, Sam from the bakery, and Ethan. The air was thick with the scent of roast chicken and baked bread, the table crowded with plates and stories and laughter. We raised a glass to Ben, to old friends, to new chances. As the sun slipped low and the fireflies danced along the fence, I realized that what I'd built here, through heartbreak and betrayal, through courage and forgiveness, wasn't just a home. It was a life worth fighting for. After everyone left, I sat alone on the porch, Ben's old flannel draped over my shoulders, looking out at the world I'd reclaimed. The night was soft, full of memory and promise. I closed my eyes and let gratitude wash over me, for the chance to begin again, for the strength to hold my boundaries, for the love that endured even when it was tested to its breaking point. If you've made it this far, maybe you see a piece of yourself in my story. Maybe you've lost something you thought you could never live without, a person, a place, a future you imagined was certain. Maybe you're still fighting to heal, to forgive, to trust yourself again. Let me tell you this, you are stronger than you think. You deserve to choose yourself, even when it hurts. And no matter how broken things seem, you can start again. It won't be easy. There will be days when you want to give up. But you're not alone, not ever. So if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments below, and send this to someone who needs a reminder that hope is real. Your voice matters. Your story matters. We're all learning to forgive, to heal, to begin again, one honest day at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing with me. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed and click the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Share your story in the comments. I read every one, and you never know who you might inspire just by telling the truth. Tonight, as the world quiets and the garden settles in for another night, I wish you peace. I wish you strength. And above all, I wish you the courage to write your own ending, no matter where you're starting from.